Yo, this hot, this the spot, there it is, pod.com. We're interviewing the best comedians, so tune in quick and get your ears receiving them. We talking about life and life to stream right to you, from the microphone right to your home, dude. Side note, this might get embarrassing, but no, don't sweat, yo, cause there it is.
Welcome to the There It Is podcast, a comedy podcast to help you find your inspiration. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. Thank you so much for listening, you longtime listeners, and thank you, you first-time listeners, for joining us. Great episode today. We have author, journalist, and screenwriter Teresa Lo with us. Very excited to have her. Very interesting career that she's had, and we talk about all these different things that she does, and she does comedy on top of all that other work she's known for. And it's a very fun and great chat. I think you'll enjoy it. First, I just want to let people know or remind you that you can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and SoundCloud, but you can also listen to it on Amazon Music. And of course, if you have a dot, you can just tell Alexa to play There It Is podcast, and it'll play. And on YouTube, we have a YouTube page, and we are putting up all of our previous episodes on there, and we put brand new episodes up later in the week on Thursdays usually. And so check that out, and we have links for that stuff in the bio. All right, well, let's just get to today's episode. As I said, it's a great, fun chat. Why don't we just get right to it? Here's my chat with Teresa Lo. Such an impressive person because you're such a multi-hyphenate. You've done a ton. I found out about you because of comedy.
So I am a writer, and it's really annoying because my parents don't think I make enough. And they're always so rude about it when I ask them for money.
And then looking you up because of interests of having you on the podcast, I very quickly saw that you have been doing a ton of things for many years now, and you have a master's in fine arts from University of Southern California, and you have so much work in the can, so to speak, when it comes to broadcasting, and you've done acting work and TV work, but you've also written a couple of books. You're an author. You've written a couple of bestsellers. It's amazing. And then a couple of years ago, you decided to then start doing comedy, and you've had some success there. What would you say is your first love?
My first love. I think that my first love is being creative. And then from there, it's like wherever I can find an avenue. So like sometimes I'll do something and I'll get to be free and be creative. And then it gets to the point where that doesn't get to happen anymore. And then I move on to something else. And so I guess it comes down to just like project by project is, you know, what works for me. Cause like say for instance, right now I'm a journalist for Hustler magazine, and I've been a journalist at other places too, but like Hustler allows me to just, say whatever I want, and like the topics that I write about are fun versus like other places were very restrictive. And so I think it kind of just comes down to the freedom of each genre. So right now with comedy, for instance, I'm pretty new to comedy, so I get to say whatever I want. I don't know if it'll ever get to the point where, I don't know, if I ever, let's say if I ever got a show or something like that, and it's like networks are breathing down my neck and it's not fun anymore. I think it'll just change to, I guess it's about freedom for me.
Right, I get that. You mentioned that you're a journalist at Hustler, and of course there's the old joke that people make about Playboy, a competitor of yours. People would always say, no, I'm just reading the articles. I didn't know that was an aspect of Hustler.
Well, not only that, like Hustler, they have like very funny political cartoons. Like not only just the articles are fun, but it's like they're like, you know, because we were talking about politics earlier, it's like they're very anti-Trump. Like one of our Christmas cards, I think it was last year's Christmas card, was literally someone shooting Donald Trump, and then the joke about like, oh, something about, like when Donald Trump said something about he could shoot someone on like Fifth Avenue and get away with it. Mm-hmm. So the Christmas card was someone shooting Donald Trump on the street and getting away with it. So it's kind of like how many work environments have jokes like that and allow you to say stuff like that. And not only that, publish that in their magazine, and that's actually their brand. So they do everything.
Larry Flint definitely hates Republicans. Did anyone get visited by the Secret Service after that was printed? Do you know?
I don't know. Like, I remember that the card was on some sort of like political blog, like people were hating on that because it was a Christmas card. So it was only sent to like, friends of Hustler, employees and whatnot. But someone did take a picture of it and put it on a political blog. I wasn't sure if it was like Breitbart or what, but then like, I don't think anything happened from that.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's also kind of interesting that while there are some Christian Trump supporters who wouldn't like the content, they have to appreciate that it was at least a Christmas card and not a holiday card, right?
Oh, maybe it was a holiday card. Okay, so maybe maybe I was wrong about that because there was no like Christmas tree or anything like that. So
all right, fair enough. So yeah, I think part of when you talk about freedom, I think part of having so many different irons and different fires is freedom, right? I mean, that is why we pursue those kinds of careers where we can do a bunch of different things. I mean, I consider myself an actor and comedian and broadcaster, and you have even more. You have those things and more on your LinkedIn. And I feel like there's freedom to that, where you have all these different avenues that you can go down to seek work and to seek fulfillment. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. I also think that for artists is that, you live in New York, I live in LA, where it's like we live in expensive cities where for the most part, like typically one job is not going to be enough to help us make a living. So it's almost like we have to be hyphenates and we have to like, have so many avenues to make income or meet people that I think it's almost like a means of survival as well as just like something creatively that we need to do for ourselves. It's like you have to do it and for different avenues.
Right. Let's talk about the books you've written. When you decided to write those books, was your focus being an author or was it one of those things you were doing? I'm not sure on the reason I ask that is because I'm not sure on the time frame of when you get out of school, you get out of graduate school, and what you pursued first. Was it writing or was it doing some of the TV work that you did?
So I was in graduate school and I studied screenwriting. And then, so what happened for me is that I noticed that I was putting in so much work with scripts. People would read them. Some people liked them. Some people didn't, but it's like none of them were getting made. So it's like just seen by just a very small amount of people. And I just thought to myself, if I write, short stories, even if I write like a book, it actually can be seen by audiences and not just like gatekeepers. And so I took like an office job and, it was like pretty easy, but I just had to sit there. And so I had so much extra time that I would just write while I was at this office job. So I wrote my first book while I was also like, being like a secretary. And just from there, I ended up self-publishing the book and it actually did really well. So my method of like, if I just reach audiences directly and bypass third parties, then I can actually prove to myself not only that people want to read my work, but that there are people who want to read my work.
Oh, well, that's a great method, great approach. You're right, though. When people are in school, they're writing a whole bunch. And so you're kind of putting yourself out there a lot and you're putting a lot of energy into something that it's not like you're getting it pitched. You're just sharing it with the people who are going to kind of tap their chin and judge it and then toss it aside and move on. But with what you did, you had this opportunity to say like, well, why don't I just make stuff and put it out there because that's what I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, one important lesson that I learned about this whole gatekeeper nonsense is that, like, if your work is good, but then just, you don't have hype or you don't have buzz around it, like, it will just sit there and die. And some people just mistakenly believe, like, oh, my work wasn't good. Like, for instance, I wrote this script and I submitted it to all these people, and people told me that it was a good script. I knew it was a good script, but like nothing was happening. And then finally, I had someone who had like clout in the industry, and he said it was good. And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, this script is amazing. And it actually started moving forward. But I was like, this is the same script that years ago people just kind of like, were like, oh, it's fine, and like didn't care. But then all of a sudden, like someone with influence said it was good. And all of a sudden, doors changed. But it was like the same piece of writing. And so with that, I think I was more into going directly to people and bypassing like industry people, just because I was just like, I want to be read, essentially.
Right. Right. That was about what, 10ish years ago when you got out of school and started writing, wrote the books?
I went to school, grad school from '07, '09.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, I'm trying to think of the timeline. I think I wrote the book, or I started on it, and I think like 2010. And then I can't remember what year I actually published it. But yeah, it's been a while since the first book came out.
2013, maybe, that the first book was, or 12,
I
2012?
think it was around that time. And then even before that, it was like I had pre-planned the story. Like I always knew I wanted to write something about like Stoll, Kansas has this like backstory to it where it's like supposed to be the gateway to hell. And so that was Stoll, Kansas, like near Lawrence, Kansas, where I went to undergrad. And so I've always been trying to like figure out how to do it. So I was originally going to write it as a script. And then I was having all these bad experiences with screenwriting and trying to like get stuff seen in Hollywood. And so then I just decided, no, I'm going to do it as a book. So that, yeah, it's around the timeline of like what you're talking about, like 2012, 2013, something like that.
Okay. And, with the way technology is now, and it's just putting out your work, in regards to you talking about gatekeepers, it's so much easier now for someone to self-release things and use the internet to their advantage.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like for instance, I made a song. It was like very stupid, and it was like I don't know if I would use the word making fun of Ben Shapiro, but it was like a rap about Ben Shapiro, and then I just uploaded it myself.
Facts don't care about your feelings, bitch. Facts don't care about your feelings, bitch. Lived hard.
And I remember like when I was trying to work with. Oh yeah, thank you. When I was like trying to work with like a friend, we were working on it like months and months ago, and then he was like, I don't like it, and I was like, oh, let's just put it out anyway. And then he didn't want to do it, and so I eventually just put it out myself. And I think it's that thing. It's that, yeah, like with the internet, it's like you can just do things yourself. You don't have to wait. And then not only that, if it's a bomb, it just disappears and no one cares, and you can try again. So it's like, I'm very much into people just, doing things yourself. I mean, you still need a team of some sort, but you don't have a gatekeeper problem.
Exactly. And, and sometimes maybe the gatekeeper problem is just in regards to the algorithms of the social media that you're using. But you can also easily get around that if you can just promote it, if you just have enough scratch lying around that you can promote something. So even then, the gatekeeper problem isn't as big of a deal. And you're right, you can just put it out, and if nobody sees it, nobody likes it, then it's just kind of, who cares? Because it doesn't burn you.
Exactly. It doesn't burn you in any way. So it's like, just try. It's like that's the thing, just try.
Right. And also, stick-to-itiveness is such a big part of this, right? I mean, I've been doing this podcast for over 4 years, and I've noticed it this year grow in numbers. And I don't know what that is other than just I've been doing it consistently. But if I had given up a couple of years ago, then this definitely wouldn't be happening now.
I think you're right about the consistency thing is that like there's all these things that everybody wants to do something. It's like everyone's like, oh, I want to like lose 20 pounds or I want to do this or, like everyone has all these goals, right? But it's like who actually will put in the work. And so it comes down to like half the battle is, are you going to be the last person standing?
Right, for sure. When you wrote your book, so one of your books is called Hell's Game, and that one did quite well, as did the Red Lantern Scandals. And are they both considered young adult novels?
No, so Red Lantern Scandals, I kind of like deviated from. So Hell's Game was a young adult horror novel, and then Red Lantern Scandals was more about like 25-year-old like club girls. So it was a little bit about based on my life, where I was like a club hostess at like this big Asian nightclub, and so I was kind of like writing about that. And so I kind of deviated a little bit from genre. And I think that at the time I was like, oh, should I keep writing young adult? Should I keep writing horror? Because I did one thing first and it did well. But then I was like, nah, I'm just going to write what I want to write. And then like maybe like short term, it would have been smarter to just keep writing horror. But instead I was like, no, I'm just going to build a portfolio of things I like. And then I guess if it's that thing about, time, like with time, it didn't matter that my portfolio was so different, but at short term, it was a little off.
Do you have anything off, like do you have any books that you hope to come out with sometime soon? Are you working on anything?
I'm working on a book right now, but it's funny is that I have been working on this one book for like a while, and I haven't even gotten to the manuscript phase because I keep changing the ideas and the outlines. I know like the general idea of what I want to do, but like I haven't gotten to the stage of writing the manuscript yet. And so I don't even know if I want to talk about it yet because I have no idea when I'll ever finish this one. So we'll see.
Well, let's talk about the process of writing a novel, because there's a lot to it that I don't necessarily know. So when you say you're not even at the manuscript phase, what does that mean necessarily? Is it that you are still trying to outline what the story would be before you just write out the whole book? Because I think a lot of people would assume you just write the book.
Yeah, like it's very interesting because I am I actually have such a process to writing a book that I even wanted to like teach it. It's like I could teach the steps, but will people actually do it? But it's like, these are the steps that I have to how I actually was able to complete the books in the past was that, the pre-planning, I think, is what takes the longest. Even when I wrote Hell's Game, like when I actually sat down and wrote it, once I had the outline and I knew where the story was going, it only took a few months. And then I got hired an editor and then I fixed it. But like writing it was the fastest part. But the pre-planning took so long. So it's like, my method is have a general idea, then have the characters, and then write out your plot, like do like an outline kind of thing, like, break it down into acts, break it down into chapters. And from the outline phase, it's like you can kind of see like, oh, this story isn't going nowhere, or, oh, this story would only fill up like 20 pages like that. Wow. And from that, you're like, could I actually fill over 100,000 words with this? And so even in the phase where I'm at now with this new novel, I'm like, I'm probably only at a short story phase. And so it's not really like big enough for a novel.
How do you know when you're plotting out that outline that it has enough to be 1,000 words?
I think it's like when you're breaking it down, if you break it down by chapters and you like, so let's say you write down like your story of like, how is this beginning, middle, end? And then you start putting it into chapters of like, each chapter needs to be kind of a cliffhanger. And so if you have so many chapters and you're like, oh, how many words would I put in this chapter? How much plot would go in this chapter? And then you really start to just kind of see like, oh, there's not enough here. How will I fill the space? And so it's like when you start to like break it down in that way, because I think a lot of people, when they want to write a book, they make the mistake of they just start writing. And I think that works with like a short story, something like 5,000 words. But if you want to write something like 100,000 words, but you don't have a game plan, you don't have a path, then you could actually probably get to like 30,000 words, like your act one. And then you're like, oh my gosh, I have nowhere to go. And so it's kind of a mistake to do that. And I think that's what kind of stops people from finishing their first book.
Interesting. And I guess one of the pitfalls can be someone trying to stretch something that really isn't 100,000 words.
Yeah.
But they're trying to make it that.
Yeah, because then it starts to meander. And then it's like, you can write something, and if nobody likes it, sure, you finished it, you liked it yourself, but it's like, was that worth your time? And I think, no one would make a movie without pre-planning. No one would write like, a play without some pre-planning. So it comes down to the novels the same way. You need to like plan it, and you can't, like what you're talking about, you can't waste your time just to fill pages.
Right. I read a book like that actually, where it just seemed really thin. And the stuff that they used to try to extend it was pretty cliche.
And you could tell as the reader, right?
Right.
Like you could see it. So it's like, why would anyone want to put their name on something like that? It's like the audience can see it,
What was so funny too about that particular book was that the author kept writing things like, he holds my gaze, I hold their gaze. My gaze falls upon such and such. It's like it was so many that I started highlighting every time she used the phrase gaze. My gaze, his gaze, their gaze. And I think ended up being like maybe 140 some times in the book that they used it. And I was like, what in the world is this person doing?
It's almost like when you're in college and the professor's like, I need a 1,000-word essay. And you could just tell someone took one sentence and is like putting the thesaurus and like expanding. And you're like, please stop. Like, right. We're adults. You don't need to do this.
Well, that's an interesting process of writing a book. And when you started getting into the other writing work that you do, I mean, reporting and journalism, what do you draw from in that? I mean, when you're in school learning about writing, you kind of end up doing it all. But how do you differentiate the different ones?
I think with journalism, there's kind of a formula for journalism, or at least with articles. I don't know if I'm using the right phrase. I think it's called the inverted pyramid, where it's like the most important thing is at the top. And then you kind of just, like put the less important things at the end. Mm-hmm. And I think like that strategy helps a lot with articles, where you're like, okay, if people stop reading it in the first paragraph, did they get as much information of the who, what, when, and where? And then you put it there. And then the rest of it, you can start putting in the details later. Mm-hmm. And I think that formula helps. Like, I think with it comes to writing, there is kind of like formulas for each medium. And like, once you understand that, it actually makes it easier to be creative, because you're like, oh, I know what these steps can be. And so, when I did screenwriting, that program was so much about this formula. Like, so USC has this, formula for screenwriting called sequences, where there's 8 sequences, and each sequence, this has to happen and this has to happen. But then it's funny because, you'll see a different film and they'll break down these sequences, but the films are so different. They're so creative that like, once you know that these like, I don't know, keep calling them formulas, which don't sound like, very creative, but once you know them, mm-hmm. they help make things just so much easier.
Right. Do you ever experience when you're writing one thing, it's not that it's hard, but it's just not flowing necessarily because you're not as into it maybe, or it doesn't seem like the sparks are there, but then with other mediums they are there?
That happens to me. Like, that's kind of happening to me right now with this book, like this new book that I'm writing, because I have tried to come up with all these different like, plots and, different twists and whatnot. And it's just not working. And it's not something I want to abandon completely. But at the same time, I'm like, if I'm bored with it, why would a reader like it? And so then I move on to something else. And so sometimes I think like when we get writer's block, I do wonder, it's like, are we really that into it? And if we're not into it, maybe it's time to do something else and just switch over. And because sometimes the inspiration will pop out of nowhere. Like even writing Hell's Game, the plot of that is like these kids, they play a game and each level they're in hell. Each level is like a different, one of the 7 deadly sins. But before that, I had another idea where it was like, oh, this married couple and the husband goes to the cemetery at night and gets like possessed by a demon. And when I was trying to come up with that like husband possessed story, I couldn't fill the 100,000 words, And so I kept trying and it wasn't working. And I just kind of kept sitting on that. And then for some reason, I can't remember why it happened, but with Hell's Game finally clicked for me, I moved away from that like husband story. So I kind of wonder what the process is, that if you're just really blocked, there might be a reason. Maybe it's just not exciting to you.
Yeah, that's a really good method. I think a really good point, because maybe you're just not feeling it in that moment, or maybe it's just like you said, like you're just not into it.
Yeah, sometimes you're just not. It's like so simple. You're just like, I'm not into it,
Yeah, I like that that you mentioned that, because I don't know. You're being very honest, I feel like. And some people aren't necessarily honest about these things when I'm reading interviews. And it's like, just admit that you didn't like it.
But it's like what you're talking about, like the honesty, right? Like when you read that book and you're like, this is so thin. It's like if that writer was just honest and said like, hey, this is more of a short story than a novel, maybe there would be no like gazing. Pages gazing,
Oh gosh, there were like a few on the same page. At one point, I was like, I got to put this down right now. At some point, I was just sort of hate reading it. I love to hate reading it. It was enjoyable for that reason and that reason alone. I think I wrote a review on it, and I kept talking. I kept saying like, hold my gaze and stuff. Anyway. You did a television show that was a film and TV review show. Can you talk about that? That was 8-ish years ago. How long did you do that?
Yeah. I can't remember the year, but 8-ish years sounds about right. Like, it was called Just Seen It. And so what happened is this guy, he was really into like Siskel and Ebert. So he wanted to make his own like review show, and he wanted to make it like, smart, where people like critique, so he got people with like, film school backgrounds and whatnot. And, eventually it like played on PBS. It was on Hulu for a while. And it was a fun experience because you just got to like watch movies and critique them.
Yeah, I guess you could fall back on your masters.
Yeah, but I mean, but I think I wasn't the best reviewer because I almost liked everything. Like, because we would be watching like Adam Sandler movies, and I was like, "This is great." Everyone else would be like, "No, this is terrible." I was like, "Why?" I was just laughed because I don't know. For me, I'm very not snobby about stuff, but I would have probably the same critique you had, where like if someone's being dishonest, where like they're trying to pull a fast one, like, oh, you just didn't have anything to say and you're just trying to like make money or something. Yeah, I would critique that. Mm-hmm. But if there's like, someone's trying to be like joyous and stupid and like it's supposed to be stupid, then I feel like you shouldn't critique them the same way you'd critique like an Oscar winning film. Yeah. So I kind of think it's like each piece has a place. And if it's like the best in the place it's supposed to be, I want to respect that.
Yeah, I've felt that for over 20 years now. I've said, why don't critics judge it based on what it's supposed to be? Or like at least judge it within the spirit of what is intended. Because it's fair. It's totally fair, I think, for someone to say, well, here are more sophisticated ways to write a script or tell a story, and this movie either did or did not do that. It's fine to talk about that. But when a movie is just kind of standard and hits the things it needs to hit to be enjoyable, because it's really just trying to be an enjoyable movie, I feel like you are being disingenuous as a critic if you're not acknowledging that and you're just saying, well, it's a standard way of telling a story. It's like, yeah, but the point wasn't to be impressive with that. It was supposed to be joyful and a fun experience. And can you speak to that at all and not ignore it like it's not there?
And even that, like the idea of being standard, it's actually so hard. It's actually so hard to even make a stupid movie that people can actually sit and watch for an hour and a half. Like there's so much crap where you're like, I couldn't even watch 10 minutes of this, right? But like if something you can watch from start to end and you're like, oh, that hit all the beats, that is actually still incredibly hard. And I think the problem with critics is that a lot of critics can't do. And I think that when people actually start to do things, like it's harder to critique others. Like, for instance, as a writer, I can critique other people's writings, but like I can still see what they're trying to do. Like, it's hard for me to just be like, this sucks, they're just so stupid, because I'm like, no, I have to understand their process. And the same thing with other things, like even like stand-up and comedy, where I'm like, oh, they were trying to do this. Maybe it failed for whatever reason, but I'm a little more forgiving because I'm like, this is really hard to create, and let alone like have the idea, but to execute successfully. So I'm like, I think that's the problem with critics, is that if they've never done it before, it's just easy to be like, this is terrible. You know?
Well, that reminds me of how a lot of athletes will complain about someone who's never played the game and really going hard on them. And it's like, well, you don't know how hard this actually is.
Yeah, it's like, you go up there and do it, you know? Like, I feel like that's the best excuse, is like, you do it then. Because there was a period of time, I can't remember when it was, but like I used to just be like one of those like trolls, and I'd always be like, blah, 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 like complaining all the time. And then I remember reading someone's like response is like, you do it then. And I was like, that's true. I was like,
yeah, it's something else. And it kind of reminds me, like we're talking about not hitting the marks, or maybe not being particularly sophisticated, but hitting the marks. A movie like Tommy Wiseau's The Room is something that, to me, there's something marvelous about it, because it's not how you write a script. It's not how you direct a film. It's not how you present a film through editing. And it misses all of these fundamentals of filmmaking. And yet, and it really doesn't hit the beats at all well either. But somehow that is such a delightful movie for me to watch. And it's not even entirely like pointing and laughing and going, ha, 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 so stupid. There is something else happening. There's some sort of special thing that happens when I'm watching that movie, despite its failure. I can't even wrap my brain around it.
I think it's the joy and how serious he took it. Like, it was so terrible, right? But like but you felt like this man thought it was brilliant. And in a way you're like, oh, that's so sweet. It's almost like when like a kid shows you like a drawing and they took it seriously, even if it's good or bad, you're like, oh, that's so nice. And I kind of think that's the difference between like The Room versus like a cash grab. Like when it's a cash grab that they're trying to like just pull something over on you, you get kind of annoyed, right? But when it's like so genuine, even if it's so bad, you're like, well, that's cool. Like, good for you, you know? And I think people felt that he tried.
I think you're onto something, because there are those movies where it's a cash grab, and they have a good cast and crew, and the director knows, and the editors, they know how to set up the beats, and the actors are kind of, they're maybe so good or have such good chemistry that you observe their performance as being pretty solid. You know, it's like it's their greatness again, you know, like I don't know, there are a lot of good actors who are in bad movies that are cash grab movies. And then you go on just not into it, you know, like you watch it and you're like, yeah, this person was good in it. And it's not like there was anything fundamentally wrong, but this movie just wasn't enjoyable at the end of the day, or it was fine, but I'm gonna forget about it. And I think that's what it has to do with it. There's not really any passion put behind it. It was just everybody on autopilot.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing with like everywhere you go is like, even going into like a coffee shop, right? You feel the difference between the barista who's like happy to be there, the one who like wants you to die. It's like you could feel the difference. And I feel like most everyone, it's like, I think there has to be something where you have to feel amount of joy. And I think that when people lose the joy in whatever they're doing is like, people can feel that. And it's like, you don't want to be a part of that art. And I think that like what you're talking about, like, yeah, with like big movies and whatnot, it's like, you can tell and it's not fun. And I think it's that even as an artist, it's like, if it's not fun for you at a certain point, it may be better to just walk away instead of just do the motions.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. Or even just like, there's that coffee shop you go into, and it's just like standard, and you get in, you get what you want, you get out. But then there's a coffee shop you can go into that has some character and some passion behind it. And maybe the coffee isn't even any good in the standard place, but you prefer it.
Yeah. I mean, when I do like, before the pandemic happened, I produced stand-up shows in LA, live ones. And I think the difference of why people kept coming back is like, I literally just said hi to people. Like I was like, but like, I've been to shows where it was like so cold where like they almost acted like, why are you here as a guest if you didn't know someone, where you're like, well, why would I come back here? You don't seem like you want me here. And it seems like this is a party I'm not invited to. Mm-hmm. So that when I started producing shows, I was like, I want to make sure everyone feels comfortable and likes being here. But it's like strange where it's like, it seemed like such a simple concept, but a lot of people don't seem to either care or want to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I hadn't thought of it that way. And some people just have a certain spirit that just makes people feel better. And it's partly because maybe they're being gregarious and talking to people and being welcoming, but also maybe just something natural about you,
That's what I hope so. I mean, that's my hope. Yeah. I mean, like, I think it's like, I feel like for me, like growing up, I grew up in this really small town in Kansas. And when I was really young, I was like bullied a lot for being Asian. And so it was like really important for me to like not be a hater, because I was like, I know how it feels to be mistreated. And so like, I guess I kind of like live my life trying to be like, but I'm not like, I'm not where I'm nice to everyone where like, if someone is a rude person, I'm not going to go out of my way to like, try to be like, I'm not that forgiving. But at the same time, I'm like, if there's someone who's just out there, I'm like, I want them to not feel terrible, because I feel like I always just knew how that felt.
There's something you mentioned a couple minutes ago about in stand-up when we're kind of judging, or not judging is too strong of a word, but just sort of critiquing what other people did. And we're saying like, yeah, I see where they were trying to go. I see what they were trying to do, but they, for whatever reason, just didn't come off right. And it's maybe if they make these tweaks. That is such a crucial thing, I think, about comedy that is maybe only truly understood by people who create comedy. Because I hear a lot of people who, it seems like most people don't know that is the correct way to critique comedy. Is to say like, is to recognize what they were trying to do and then just see where they missed, and not assume malice. But I think what the average person does is assumes malice. Even when they say like, I see what they were trying to do, but da-da-da-da-da, and it's like, oh, but all of that da-da-da-da-da you just gave me is so far off from what they can accomplish. But I like conversations with comics about this because they will be able to sort of pinpoint that thing, that it's, hey, we're all just trying stuff. We're really just trying to make people laugh. No one's trying to hurt any feelings or insult anybody. And we're taking material and saying like, maybe there's something here. And so we're just trying stuff. So that's where I see what they were trying to do comes in.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, for instance, if someone's on stage and they're making like these really like offensive jokes, but they're trying to be observational, but it's like, okay, I can see they're trying, I don't like it, but I can see what,
Right.
but what I don't like when it actually comes to like real malice is like when they're not doing well. So they start to pick on individual people. And even if it's just because they have a lack of skill and that's what they're, I cringe at that where I'm like, I don't forgive that kind of like comedy, which I still a lot of
Yeah.
people do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to just bad jokes, I feel like you can kind of see the two differences. Because one thing that like I notice when like there's like mean comics is like if they get a laugh, then they keep going with that meanness. And then I'm like, oh, okay, you were hoping that you basically being a bully was gonna work for you. And it did, and that's when I'm like, nah. But if it just comes to like bad jokes, then I'll be more forgiving for that.
Yeah, absolutely how I feel. There was I used to run a show when I lived in South Carolina, or help run a show, and there was someone who came as an open mic, and somebody came and just started telling anti-Semitic jokes that were like street jokes, and just mortified the entire audience. Like no one liked it, and he was just he was just a monster. It was only the second time there, and I was kind of blindsided by the fact that he told those jokes because he didn't act like that the first time he was there. And he snapped on a lady in the audience who called him out for doing the jokes. And that was the sort of thing where it's like, okay, there is no, I see what you're trying to do, but you,
Right.
because
Right.
that guy was just, you can't just say anti-Semitic things and then that like, but I'm just trying to get a laugh. It's like, that's not a laugh that you're trying to get. That's honestly not a laugh. You're not trying to get Jewish people to laugh at that. So
Right, exactly.
you're not trying to get a laugh if you're not trying to get them to laugh at it.
Exactly. And I think that's the thing too. It's that like artists can almost spot other artists trying and can also spot when someone's pretending to use art to just be a bad person.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But then when there's something like maybe a controversial joke that Sarah Silverman tells, or someone that famous, and people say, "Well, that's where I'm like, I know what she's trying to do." And then sometimes there's a famous person like this Kathy Griffin, that infamous picture from a couple years back with the beheaded Donald Trump, where I was like, I don't see what you're trying to do. Like, I don't get where there's a joke here. I don't get what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
And it's not funny.
I feel like that was a pure just attention grab. Like there's no punchline behind it, but at the same time, you're like, I guess I get you're trying to get attention, which she did get. But I think that's when like as other artists, you're kind of like, that was just for attention. And then it's like, that's when people get that's when it gets iffy because it's like, we're all trying to get attention, but then it's like, don't you want attention from thought? I don't know. It's like,
I totally agree. Yeah, that's sort of, I guess, shock jock type of mentality gone wrong.
Yeah, but at the same time, I was like, well, I guess it succeeded. So, I mean, like, I don't know.
Yeah, gone wrong in the sense that it didn't weave any sort of nuance. Because you're supposed to, like, stir something up if you're going to do shock jock, but not actually violate anything.
That's true. But then at the same time, I was like, this has been years later and we still remember it.
That's
we
true.
still talk about it. Where I was like,
that's the part that's been successful.
Yeah, I was like, maybe she did win. I mean, I think she kind of did win because like she's probably in a history book for that versus if she had like, whatever else she did.
Right.
Like, but that was, that's the thing.
Yeah, if her outcome was only to get people talking about her, then she succeeded. But if she wanted people to talk about her the way people talk about a Chris Rock or Howard Stern or somebody, I don't know, like somebody who, or Sarah Silverman even, then I don't know that she quite did what she intended.
But I think that's also like her persona though, right? Like even like her joke was that she's the life of the D-list, right? So it's like, it's always about her doing something shocking to get attention, which I was like, well, I guess that's actually on brand. Like it would It would
Yeah,
almost be
okay.
weirder if like Chris Rock did it. It would almost be
Oh,
stranger, but it makes
yeah.
way more sense that it's her doing things to get attention. Because like even her
That's a good
act,
point.
like I
I
watched
see
one of
that.
her specials and it was just stories about other famous people.
Yeah,
And I noticed Perez Hilton does that too. Like
yeah.
he wrote a book and it was just name dropping people and like bad stories about them. I was like, well, I guess that's a genre. It's not a genre that I personally would want to do, but at the same time, I was like, I see, I guess, what space they fill.
Yeah, I get that. Let's talk about, because you mentioned that you are producing shows. What sort of shows are you producing?
So before the pandemic, I was producing. I had this one show in North Hollywood, which was fun. It was like a fun bar show,
Mhm.
and then I was producing these fundraisers for RAIN, which was it or not was is the nation's largest anti-sexual violence organization. So we're raising money for them. They run the uh, anti-sexual abuse hotline,
Mhm.
and then I was also running the show where like comedians would perform in their underwear. And that was pretty fun. But then, the pandemic came and then just everything went crazy. And so started to do online shows, but I'm taking a break from that at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. Why are you taking a break from the online shows?
I think like I felt a little bit of Zoom fatigue. Like
Mm-hmm.
I really I like Zoom, but I think at the same time like doing a comedy show every week on Zoom, I just felt like other people were doing it a lot too where I was like I don't know if it's just too much like Zoom comedy at the moment. I don't know, maybe I'll get back into it maybe in January or not, but like I just felt like I was like, well, is this the same as real life? I don't know. So I guess that was my thought process.
It's tough to do stand up on Zoom. You can do certain things like storytelling. I feel like oddly works a little better than stand up on Zoom.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Just, I don't know why that is. I guess because so much of stand up feels like, um, hey, we're having an experience together. I'm cutting up to get you to laugh, and I'm kind of feeding off of the way you're responding to me in order to do that. And
Hmm.
you kind of can't do that. Even if you have an quote unquote audience there who's laughing, you can't look someone in the eyes and point at them and say something and just have that kind of moment. And that I think hurts it. But in regards to Zoom fatigue, I noticed because I was following it for There It Is for the website, how many comedy shows were online for people to check out. And I think people in April, for valiant reasons, decided I'm going to put out shows.
Hmm.
And you're right, there were a ton. And
Yeah.
and I would say like 90% of those aren't happening right now.
Yeah.
And I
I
think
noticed
there
that.
is the fatigue, and I think there are several things. Some of it was it's just not super enjoyable to do comedy on Zoom. And also the big thing I think is maybe at that time we were all thinking, okay, let's be optimistic. Maybe it'll just be a couple of months and then we can get back to normal this summer and doing shows in bars. And then when time went on and that wasn't looking plausible, I think that also made people say like, well, this isn't something I want to do all the time this way. I want to do it all the time the way we were doing it pre-COVID. And this was supposed to be a temporary couple of months thing. So I think even on a subconscious level, that's how people responded to that, which is completely understandable.
I also think another thing that's happening is that people are now starting to do these speakeasy illegal outdoor shows.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of like, if they're going to do that, why do they want to be on Zoom?
Right.
Like, for the most part, I'm staying in, I'm like, I don't want to get sick, like at all. But like,
Yeah.
I see these people and they're doing these like, hidden shows. Cause like in LA, you're not allowed to do any type of shows, even if it's outdoor, but people are still doing it. And it's like, well, if everyone's going to be outside and doing these, why are they going to do Zoom? It's like, they just don't want to.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And then also here in New York, there are a couple of places that were doing some outdoor things.
Oh,
Like just
wow.
in the back of their bar or whatever. and
Yeah.
they were keeping people socially distant. It was just like Chappelle's thing, where people were at their own table and 6 feet away from other tables and had to wear a mask, except for when they were drinking or stuff like that. Like, I think even the comics were wearing masks, so it worked.
Oh, that's good. Like
Yeah.
here it's been kind of like here it's kind of been buck wild where like the actual like venues, the health department come and shut them down, and so they're not allowed to. So people do like things in their backyard, people do things in the park, on the beach, and like, you know, they'll show photos and people are just like smoking blunts together. They're like taking pictures together. It's like, you know, they're hugging. I was like, I don't want
that.
yeah, I don't want that. I don't want to also offend people by not hugging them without a mask, but I'm like, no thanks. I'm staying in.
Well, in my hometown, not my hometown, the town I lived before living here, I saw that there are a couple of, there's one or two open mics came back up, and I saw some pictures from it, and it looked like maybe half the people were wearing masks on stage, but everyone else wasn't. It's like, but you're all using the same mic.
Oh.
I don't know that I would be doing that if I were there right now.
I know. It's like, I guess that they clean it, but the chance of them
I'm
cleaning
sure they
it,
do,
though,
but you know,
probably not.
yeah. Especially at one point, it was like you couldn't even find any Clorox wipes or anything like that. You couldn't find disinfectant wipes, so it was like, I'm not gonna bother. Well, we've reached the end of the episode. It's time to create something together.
Okay.
And I was really fascinated with the process you were talking about with regards to writing a book. What is the simple way that we can sort of create something together with that? I don't want to, it's something you do for work. I don't want to make you over.
No, this is fun. Okay, no.
So yeah.
But you said a simple way to create a book?
Yeah, or like like if we're going to write a book, what would that process be? You've talked about it. It's come up with the characters, know the story you want to tell, put out an outline. Could we go through that process and sort of demonstrate that real quick?
Oh, sure. That'd be cool. So one of the first things that I do is I tell people, come up with your log line.
Okay.
Where it's like one or two sentences that are so clear that if you verbally say it, people can imagine what the book cover or poster or whatever would look like just from your two sentences. So it kind of needs to have the who, what, when, and where, and also the genre. Like, it's just so clear. If you can come up with that in 2 sentences, you're ready to go to the next step.
Oh, wow. Okay. So what does that sound like? Do you have an example that you can throw out?
Sure. So I guess for Hell's Game, it is on Halloween night, 4 teenagers take the school nerd to the cemetery where he is snatched by demons. Afterwards, they must play a game in hell to rescue his soul.
Wow. Then that's all very clear.
So you get the whole
the cemetery. I'm seeing the cemetery. I'm seeing hell.
And you know the genre based on what's happening.
Absolutely.
So it's the same thing. So it's like if you can say it in 1 or 2 sentences where it's that clear, then you're ready.
Yeah. Okay. So it's kind of like husband and father Timothy Chalamet. I'm thinking of something that's like, living a normal life until such and such, like something like that.
Yeah.
Or I guess you can even end it with some sort of like, he never expected blah, blah, blah. And does that sort of sound like a thriller? Does that kind of convey that sort of idea?
Yeah, so it's kind of like that where it's like, you know who the 2 main people are, and then you kind of set up, they're living this normal life. So when you even named like Timothy Chalamet, I was like, oh, they're like kind of like suburban, maybe like middle class people, and then but something will change. But now it's like, oh, what will that change be?
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. And then when you start doing, well, I guess you said next would be the characters.
So once you know the log line, then you're ready to move on to the characters. So now let's say like the dad. what's the dad's job? What's his age? What does he like to do? What are his mannerisms and things like that? Do you break that down? The same with like the teen son. It's like, is he cool at school? Is he not cool? Like, what does he dress like? What kind of foods does he eat? Like little details like that really start to paint a picture of who these people are. And then once you know the characters, like once you know a character, you can put him in any situation and you should be able to figure out what that person would do. And if that is ever unclear, then you don't know the character enough and you have to go back and like add more details. Interesting.
And that's every single character that you expect to present in the book, or just the main characters that you should have?
Pretty much every character, because for instance, even a small character of like, let's say, like, you know, when we're talking a little bit about a coffee shop and like the vibe there, right? You don't necessarily with the barista need to know their whole backstory, but you do need to know that if I came in and I'm a stranger, how would that barista treat me? Like if something went wrong, what would that person do? Like that kind of thing. So you just have to know these answers. It has to be so crystal clear to you as the writer that you created them, but then the reader will also be like, oh, that's what I expected based on what you gave me.
Ah, interesting. So it's sort of like setting up something and then kind of giving them the punchline, if we were to put it in comedy terms.
Yeah, exactly. Because like, I don't know, you probably have seen so many like films and whatnot where they really, the writers will set up this great character, these great worlds. And then like halfway through, you're like, that character wouldn't do that. Like it makes you mad. I think Game of Thrones is a really good example of that, where you're like, wait, what? Like, why did this happen? And I think that's the same thing. It's that like, if you create a character, you should be able to guess what they would do.
That's great. Yeah, and I think a lot of people do sort of, particularly TV shows, when they have kind of maybe gone a little too long in the tooth, the creators can sort of, what's the word? Kind of go against what the integrity of the character that they had before. That seems to happen a lot.
Mm-hmm. And it makes the audience mad, you know, and that's the thing. It's like, you can't do that. So it's like, I guess that's the thing. It's like, you need to create a character where it's like, it's true to the character, not true to the plot.
Right. Okay. And then you start plotting it out with an outline.
Yeah. So it's like, once you know the character, for instance, like, let's say a character that everyone knows, like, let's say Walter White from Breaking Bad, right? Like, and you say, oh, he's on vacation. Like that's the story you have started with. And it's like, because you've created a character that's so clear, if you set up a situation like he's on vacation and he runs out of money, you should be able to guess as a writer, like what will happen based on the character you created. And then from that will lead to the next plot point, the next plot point.
Oh, interesting. And should you kind of have in your mind already a beginning, middle, and end before you start going to those different plot points?
I think you definitely need to have that. So it's kind of like you want to have just the general idea of where this story is. But then also it's like, if you create a character and it leads nowhere to where you originally wanted to go, you need to tweak either your plot or you need to tweak your character. But you can't force two things that don't match together, or then you're just going to have crap, essentially. You know, it's almost like, I guess, using Game of Thrones as an example again, where it's like, if they really wanted that giant, you know, all those twists ending at the very end, they probably needed to do more time in between, like, you know, what had happened, because it was such a jump, you know.
If we choose you, will you wear the crown?
Why do you think I came all this way?
But I think what happened is like they knew their ending, but they didn't take the time to like get there.
Interesting. And at that point, you're ready to start writing the whole story, the manuscript maybe?
Yeah. So if you like are really satisfied with your outline, it ended up where you wanted it to go, and it looks like it's going to be like the page number you want. So like genres, it depends. Like For instance, a young adult novel, you can get away with just like 40 to 50,000 words. But if you're writing like a, novel for adults, it probably needs to be more in the 100,000 range. But if you know that you can fill up that space, then I think you're ready to go.
Excellent. Well, there it is. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Teresa.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is really fun. I enjoyed talking to you about writing and comedy and all that.
And we enjoyed having her. I hope you enjoyed listening to her. And you can follow her on her website, teresalowwriter.com, and on Twitter at @TeresaLo_tweets, and on Instagram and Facebook at Teresa Lo Writer. Of course, links in bio. And don't forget to follow us at There It Is Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Did I say Instagram? Okay, well, I'm definitely old now. You can follow me on Twitter at JasonFarJokes and on Instagram at JasonFarPics. I wonder if Instagram even exists. Let's start it. And then everyone's parents can just all older people can. I don't want to get into ageism. Until next time, be good to each other.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.